All right, so thank you for that, Dr. Daniel Jenkins, who just gave an overview of some of his pathway into this, into his current position as Executive Director of the Slave Society's Digital Archive. Hopefully we can come back to that a little bit, and we'll move on with Dr. Mary Ellen Pethel.
And Nikki, would you mind giving me permission to share my screen?
Oh yeah, of course.
So hi everybody. I know most of you in different capacities, and so I really appreciate Nikki extending this invitation. Pivoting during a pandemic, I feel like I've been pivoting for most of my professional life, and so I find this topic really interesting, and I do think that I have had a very non-traditional path to this point, and I think for me. It serves as an advantage because I've had so many experiences that it gives me not only better context but better perspective about different ideas that I might have or different audiences that I might be trying to reach. I began as graduating undergrad and had this crazy idea that I wanted to be a lawyer, and spent a year in law school and decided no way. And dropped out and took a job as a public high school teacher in Northwest Georgia, basically because I needed to pay bills, and worked in public high school as I earned my master's and certificate in education, and then continued to teach public high school as I simultaneously earned my PhD over a 5-year period. So worked full-time and while getting my PhD at Georgia State University in Atlanta, and then moved to Nashville and worked. Worked at a community college in a tenure track position towards the end of my PhD program, also in Georgia, and then moved to Nashville and began working at Harpeth Hall School, which is an all-girls independent school, so very different from anything else where I had ever worked before. The students actually asked you what their homework was and said thank you on their way out of class. I was just blown away. And so taught there, really just left Harpeth Hall teaching wise for 14. I was there for 14 years, but for 8 of the 14 years, I was also adjuncting at Belmont and working on the dissertation to book project. And that's when my interest in digital humanities really began. I had finished the PhD. I was nearing the end of dissertation to book. And, I had 25, 30 more years in teaching, and I wanted to make sure that I had as many tools as I could have in my tool belt. And so I found out actually from Marianne Caton in the library, and found out that there was a cohort at George Mason University for a post-grad certificate in digital public humanities. And if any of you are interested in this or interested in passing this along to postdocs or undergrads or graduates, to me, it was one of the most worthwhile things I've done. It took 18 months because you just do one course a semester. It's 3 courses, and then you do 2 internships. And so I did one of those internships with Smithsonian and worked on a database called Culture Conflicts, where they're creating a massive database to basically to make and preserve records of historical and cultural landmarks all over the world in case there is a natural disaster or in case there's an attack. We saw a lot of things lost in like the Haitian earthquake, for example. But anyway, so I did that George Mason project and post-grad certificate program. And so it wasn't a master's, but it's official. I'm able to list that on my CV. And those courses really gave me some training in digital. Daniel mentioned being self-taught, and I think all of us are self-taught to a large extent. We're self-starters. In the digital humanities world, you have to be, because a lot of times there's not an instruction manual for what you're trying to do. But that George Mason program, and it was taught by Brian Platt, Stephen Roberts, Sharon Leon, some of the big names in digital humanities, and I was able to have them for classes, they were all online. So you do it as a cohort, it's all online. And one of those classes with Sharon Leon, who's now at Michigan State, was about creating a digital project based on place. And so I used historical markers already existing downtown and worked with the Metro Historical Commission, who had all the data for the records, the historical markers, and for the images and related information, and created this little very basic walking tour. And that ended up being the inspiration for Nashville Sites. I did that project and realized that Nashville didn't have anything like that. A lot of other cities did. And if we didn't want another outside for-profit company coming in and telling our stories, we needed to start doing it ourselves. And so I, working with the Metro Historical Commission and its foundation, its 501c3, and working with all of the universities pretty much in town. And I was just going to show you a list of the partners real quick that we have. Let me get it. I'm cherry picking from a presentation I recently did, but this is just a list of all. This isn't even a complete list, but obviously Belmont. And so Belmont then shifted my adjunct position into a professor of practice position in order for me to teach and also work on this full time. So at that point I scaled way back to a part-time position at Harper Cole because it was still a temporary position at Belmont. And then they offered me in February of last year, thank God it was before COVID really hit, they offered me a tenure track position last February. And so for me, if you want to look at it this way, I created a project that got me a tenure track job.
That's great.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. And so I'm not saying that every digital humanities project can do that, but I think in my case, I don't think it was the only reason, but I think this is really what pushed the university. They knew that at the end of the professor of practice that I was going to go somewhere. And so they had to make a decision of whether to make that position permanent or not. And so thankfully they did, because I think Belmont is a great place for me. And so, but you see Belmont, Vanderbilt, Fisk, TSU, MTSU, we had other local scholars from all across Cumberland University, Tennessee State Museum, and then a lot of other private foundations, grant-making foundations. So just a really wide range of stakeholders. And I think that that's been the other big success story. And I'll just wrap up my little piece with showing you Nashville Sites. I'm not going to give you a full tour because you guys are all digitally literate, but I'll just say you go to nashvillesites.org, and it's the homepage. The tours have taken, we launched in November of 2019. We're now at 27 tours, and we're recording. We are editing the tour content and are recording in early March a tour we've been working on for a long time, an East Nashville tour. So be on the lookout for that East Nashville walking tour, and probably it'll be launched mid-March. But you go in and they've got audio narration. If you're not on the ground, something that we really pushed with COVID or were forced to develop maybe more quickly was to create a more obvious virtual tour option for COVID. So if you click this take tour virtually, it turns off all the mapping functions so that it's not trying to tell you how to walk from stop to stop. And so that has really helped in COVID because people have been wanting to do things but not leave the house. So this gives you an opportunity almost to escape. And you can still view the map and see where the tour route is. You've got the full narration. And then for each tour stop, if you scroll below, you can see like where it is on the longer list. You can see the full record and citation. This is for students. You click copy citation. This is the metadata Dublin Core record. You click copy citation, go over to your Word document, Control V, and it pops it right in there. And then if you're interested in other tours related to a particular site, like for example, Fort Nashboro is on 3 other tours. So you could skip around and then go to those tours. I'm really excited about a couple of other things that I'll highlight. One is that we have just released lesson plans. And this is in working with, and Angela, this is actually part of our Mellon partnership. We've got additional ones to add for the tours, but we've got grades 4 through 8 and grades 9 through 12 lesson plans that were written by Metro Nashville teachers. And each one is PDF, it's downloadable. It gives you the standards, the learning objectives, the essential questions, what you need. And then for every single tour stop, there is some kind of activity or question or prompt that it's asking. And so we're so excited. We've just launched these in the last month. We started working on these last summer. And so we now have 10 lesson plans that go with 10 different tours. And really they're 20 lesson plans because there's a one for 4 through 8 and one for 9 through 12 for 10 different tours, if that makes sense. And so they're grade and age appropriate. And so I'll just end with saying that we're really excited because we are working on this Mellon Partnership for Humanities Education that involves the following people, some of whom you'll recognize. And Angela has been a great source of not only inspiration, but also encouragement and advice on this front. And so we're really excited, but this is the personnel here, Dr. Lee Williams, many of you know him. Kaylee Whitman, I hope many of you know, she's ABD there at Vanderbilt. She's now been with Nashville Sites for 2 years. 2 other faculty members at Fisk, and then I'm really sort of consulting, but as the executive director of Nashville Sites, because Belmont's not officially part of the Mellon Partnership, but I'm still there sort of consulting. And we will be producing additional lesson plans, hosting a community workshop that I hope all of you will come to. And we're going to be working on our first 2 driving tours, which are Jefferson Street and a civil rights driving tour. So that was a lot, and I'll hush now, but that's sort of the general tour of not only my professional life, but my current projects.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Mary Ellen. And we can come back and discuss all of this. But first, let's hear a little bit from Dr. Angela Sutton about the work that she does.
All right, so I'm going to try this. Oh, does that work? Is
Yeah.
that better? Oh, thank goodness. Okay. Thank you, Lynn, for this idea. This is much better than trying to rush through my attic and trying to find the microphone I had hidden in there. Yeah, so I think a lot of what I say is going to echo what Daniel and Mary Ellen were saying, right? About these jobs not being jobs that exist already. So it really takes someone who has a strong understanding of what their transferable skills are, someone who is not afraid to look for needs and find creative ways to fill those, and also people who are open and have an understanding of timing, right? Because so much of these jobs really depend on being able to kind of seize the moment, as it were. I think we can all agree, like all 3 of us have really been seizing the moment for several years now. So I got my start also with the Slave Society's digital archive, so with Jane and Daniel. I was a postdoc at the DH Center there. And while I was working there, the site of Fort Negley became endangered. And the mayor at the time, Megan Barry, sold it off for development for really much less than it was worth. And a lot of descendants came to the Friends of Fort Negley and were like, hey, this is like our history. This is the only place in our city where our history is acknowledged at the time. Now, of course, it's blown up in a really beautiful way. And so from there, I spoke with several people on campus who also had a concern about what was going on. And I met with the descendants and I was like, well, what would you do? Like if you had money, if you had access to a digital humanities suite, like what would you suggest I do? And they said, well, we have stories, but no one is listening to them. And I was like, okay, well, I can get you a microphone. Like I can do that. And so it was really great timing just to be at the center and be able to have access to all this information, all this understanding of how to archive things, how to preserve people's personal relics, their cultural heritage, their ancestral stories, their genealogy, all of that, right? So we had lots of librarians that were able to help, lots of historians, lots of graduate students who had interest. And it was just really nice to be able to help be part of a team like that, to go to all the descendants who had like spent this time learning about themselves. And who wanted to share the story with Nashville. So we didn't go and like hunt down anybody. We didn't pull together trees and approach people who weren't ready, but we went to people who had a story and wanted to tell it and hoped that their understanding of themselves would help Nashville understand itself better, right? So like kind of thinking of it in those terms. And so from there, I created the archive for the Fort Negley Descendants Project with so much help. Like I think almost everyone in this room has touched it in some way, or has helped talk about it or spread it in some way, which is really beautiful to be back in a room like that. But like being able to get those stories front and center right as the fort was in danger was such a crucial moment for Nashville. And it really kind of like helped change the way the city, I think, saw itself and understood its histories. And so, so much of it was just learning on the job, right? Like I'm not exactly self-taught. Like I think most of the people in this room have taught me something, and I deeply appreciate that. But I did have the ability to like take all that information, synthesize it, and figure out how to create a thing that the city needed. And I think that taught me how to keep doing that, like how to find out what it is that people need, what do institutions need, what do cities need, what do partnerships between institutions and cities need. And so it's been a lot of fun just kind of like going along my journey every year, assessing where I'm at and thinking like, okay, what is it that people need? Do I have the skills to fill it? And if not, do I know someone who does? Can we partner? And how do I find the money to make that happen? And so a lot of it is like having those skills to kind of like seek out and be proactive and talk to the right people. And a lot of it also is like privilege, right? Like being at Vanderbilt is a wonderful thing. Knowing people at Vanderbilt is a wonderful thing. Being able to be useful to people at Vanderbilt is a wonderful thing, but then also having the skills to be able to translate that to a public. And so like kind of having a foot in both worlds has been like a really big part of my career, and has really helped me with what I'm doing now in terms of both the Descendants Project, as well as the Mellon Partners, as well as the grants I'm currently writing now for something a little bit more archival as well, like doing more with Black Nashville and all of that history, right? So yeah, I would say like just to echo the skills that people keep throwing out is like understanding how to manage projects, understanding how to create a project and shepherd it from inception all the way through to the end with a bunch of other people's visions that kind of shape it and affect it, how to ensure that all stakeholders are getting something out of a partnership, how to mentor people and bring in the right people, because the wrong person can really break a project, but the right person can really catapult it in this really beautiful way. So like knowing how to ask for help from the right people at the right time, these I think are all things that can really help shape your career. And I think for me, the number one thing really has been that I just know where I'm interested, like the things that I really care about. Like it's a personal thing for me. Like, I mean, this is my career. These are my skills, right? I have a PhD. I know what I'm doing, but I have also just a deep personal interest in seeing history be realized in a way that is fair and equitable. And that's always been like a part of my own core personality. And so because of that, I think it causes me to seek out things that maybe I wouldn't have considered or that academia doesn't teach you to consider. So really, I've only ever done what I wanted to do. I've only ever worked with projects that I felt strongly about and believed in strongly, right? Like Nashville Flights, that was really fun collaboration as well, and Slave Society Digital Archive, like things that I believe need to be in this world. I think that belief carries you a lot when you don't always know what you're doing or you may not have the skills that you need.
Angela, was there more that you wanted to say, or is that okay? Awesome. Sorry, was there a question? Okay, great. So this is fantastic. I think that we have some really evident commonalities between everybody's experiences and some phrases or ideas that have come up a lot. I wanted to come back to something that Dr. Dan Jenkins was starting us off with, which is this idea of a kind of naivete of plunging into the unknown because, for various kinds of reasons, maybe it's because you need funding or because you see the opportunity or because you see the need. And there's a combination between maybe a willingness to leap into that and sort of do what it takes, but maybe also a comfort with the idea that there's something over the horizon that you maybe don't totally see yet. I guess I wanted to ask that or sort of raise that as a potential topic for conversation. Like, did you feel that what you'd stepped into was bigger than you originally anticipated? Were there moments where you had that same kind of sense, like, wow, I really didn't know what I was getting into?
For
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
I mean, no, I mean, and I would say that I still have those kind of moments sometimes. Because one of the things with this, and I've reflected on this recently, when I coming back to campus this semester, was the first time since like my
Mm.
third semester at Vanderbilt that I kind of knew what the next 2 or 3 years was going to look like.
Yeah.
So I think part of,
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to be true regardless of what your path is in the early job market right now. But part of the reality right now is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that just comes with the territory. But that's particularly true, I think, in DH, because in a lot of places, certainly at Vanderbilt, we're still figuring out what exactly these positions look like. And what, I don't know that there isn't like a 30-year roadmap for what a career in DH looks like, really, except for maybe like a handful of guys at Virginia or Northeastern. So at this point, you have to do exactly what I think Mary Ellen, Angela, and I have done, which is to kind of make a case for your value, and the value of your project. And because just as Mary Ellen said, there isn't necessarily, or pretty much never is there, an exact guidebook for, building a digital archive with early modern documents in various states of decomposition, or from building a grassroots project to do local walking tours, or building a grassroots project to preserve a local historical park. You have to pick and choose. I mean, there are resources out there. The internet's an amazing resource. Stack Overflow is an amazing resource specifically for a lot of these development problems. And you have to, do the best to find answers that are kind of close to the answers that you're looking for, and then figure out how to put them together in a way that makes sense. One little quick example of that, and this speaks to the original question of, did you ever wonder if you were getting into something that was bigger than you had anticipated? So just this past weekend, I'm in the process of closing out Jane's most recent British Library grant, which is massive, 150,000 images. A problem we encounter a lot is that image rotation is not right. And whether it's because the EXIF metadata is bad, or there is some user error, or some combination of the two, I basically had 150,000 images it's easy to get a sideways image oriented correctly, but it's not easy to figure out if the image is upside down or not. And in the past, the way I had addressed that issue is just done it manually, kind of brute forced it. I wasn't going to brute force 150,000 images. So I thought to myself, okay, we know some things about these images, right? They're against a black backdrop, and there's a little color checker on them. And if the color checker's on the bottom of the image, it's right side up. The color checker's on the top of the image, it's upside down. So I basically just wrote a script that, out of these 17 million pixel images, grabbed, 40 important pixels from 3 places on the image and said, are they black? Are they not black? And that script, to like 99% plus degree of accuracy, can tell if an image is upside down or not. But that's a problem that even, 2 or 3 years ago, I would have been completely overwhelmed by. So I think one of the really wonderful things about moving forward in these sorts of positions is you kind of aggregate skills over time, and then you kind of level up, right? And it gets to a point where a problem that was really intractable, not so long ago, becomes something you can handle. And that to me is part of why, even if it can be overwhelming at times, I always want to do things like this that allow me to tackle problems like that. Because it really is a cool feeling when you see that script running and you're churning through thousands of images and flipping them the right way, right? So I don't know. That was kind of tangential, but hopefully that brought it all together.
No, I think that was awesome. I'd love for the other panelists to respond.
Daniel's got way more technical expertise, that's for sure. I'm not flipping any images or running scripts, but I will say that part of this, yes, not knowing what you got into, but also seeking out and finding the right people to help you, I think, is the other huge key. So because I'm not able to write code, and my technical expertise is somewhat limited, so it's like I'm not fluent in it, but I can understand like the digital language, and so I was able then to be the intermediary between the stakeholders and our web developers. so that I could talk to both parties and be able to communicate what their goals were. So I think it's not only people you're working with on your team, and certainly having people that are helping with content and editing, but having a clear idea if you're working with a group of people. Like, for example, last summer we had between the people who work on Nashville sites as part of their jobs, that's me, Tim Walker, Jessica Reeves. There's 3 of us. But in addition to that, we had 9 interns. So we had a total of like me managing like 12 people for the summer with hours and tasks. And I think finding a good organizational system also, and just developing those project management skills, for me, that's what was more self-trained. I didn't take a training course on how to manage a project or people, but I had to do that. And then I'll finally say, like, to have a successful digital project, and I think just generally, it doesn't just have to be professionally or with a digital project, but the more diverse stakeholders you can find, the better. The more different audiences that you can tap into, the better. Like, we're trying to tap into the tourist that's bar hopping, as well as, university students and researchers. So cast the net wide.
Yeah, I think if I were to add to that, definitely casting the net wide is a useful one. And I think you never really know, like, the DH world is really small, Nashville is really small, Vanderbilt is really, really small. And so really many people that you find helpful at some point will cycle back around in some other incarnation in some place. And so it's really about keeping many relationships open and trying to find ways to both be helpful to, but also being open to being helped by a wide variety of people. And kind of trying to understand also the differences in what people need and what people want when they come to your project as well. So for example, with my project, I have worked with people from FISC and from TSU, from Tougaloo and Berea through my job as the Associate Director for the Mellon Partners Program. But then I also work with a lot of the city, like Friends of Fort Negley, Metro Parks employees. I've worked with Tim Walker before, like a lot of different people who are city employees or who are tangentially related to Metro Nashville in some way. And then I've also worked with a lot of students. Currently, Jane sent me a really fantastic undergraduate intern who's doing this as part of his coursework, and he's one of the ROTC students, so he brings all this military knowledge to it, which is fantastic because Fort Negley is a Civil War site. There's a lot of military stuff that I've hesitated to get into because it's not exactly where my heart lies, but I now have someone who's super interested in it, and it's been really great to be able to assign that to him and have him just run with it, and he's just super excited every time he finds out about some very obscure small thing that one person did in the regiment somewhere in one battle in Nashville. He will do all the research on that. So when I build the website for the larger archive, I already have all of the explanations ready for people who might not know what they're seeing in the documents or who may not know what they're seeing in the data. So it's just kind of thinking ahead to and realizing okay, right now Civil War things are not super prescient, but at some point they will be. And since I have someone who's interested, let's make sure that we keep him interested by giving him what it is that he wants to do, and really kind of helping shape that, and knowing that at some point that piece will fall into the bigger project. So it's having this idea of both knowing that I have in my head a plan for the next year, but then when my contract, it ends in 2022, right? So I have a plan for what happens if I have to leave in 2022. I also have a plan for what happens if I can stay for 5 years. I also have a plan for what happens if I can stay for 10 years. So I keep thinking through how it would look in each iteration. I can only scale up so much each year, but each year I have a plan for how things could be bigger if I were able to find more funding, if I were able to have more partners, if I were able to find a different position that would allow me more time to work on them. So I think it's a matter of being incredibly flexible too, and kind of thinking through that flexibility also means that different people have different roles and at different stages in what you're doing. Also, for example, one person that's super integral to the project that I have in mind for 5 years from now is currently working with Jane in the Slave Society Digital Archive, right? So Jim Schindling, his spatial historian program is so incredibly useful for what I'm doing, but we don't know how long we'll be able to hold on to him, right? Yeah. So I'm thinking while we have him, let's get everything into that system. Let me train on that system. Let me understand how it works. so that when, like, hopefully never, but if he leaves, I can still do the project without him. So it's like,
we all need
all
to
these
keep
ways,
it.
like, right? Yeah, I mean, God willing, he will be at Vanderbilt forever. But like, because I'm kind of constantly thinking through, like, what are the skills I don't have? What can I learn right now? Who can I get to help me now while they're still around? And then also trying to make sure I'm giving that back in equal amounts, because I realize how much I'm borrowing and taking and relying on the goodwill of other people in order to get these projects done. So then in turn, also offering up that goodwill to other people when they have similar projects or when they need my skill set for something else. So I do a lot of things that may not logically look like are part of my job, but fortunately my supervisor recognizes that they are part of my job, because it's about maintaining a network of people who really matter when it comes to shaping the public history community and really matter when it comes to Vanderbilt's partnerships outside of the university. And so, like, it really is useful to kind of be able to have that, like, I don't know how to call it, but like just the cultivation of network and valuing people even when they're not necessarily immediately valuable right now, because at some point you know that their viewpoint is important, or you know that they have helped you in the past, they may help you in the future. And it's healthy when you keep a very robust community together. And so doing those like community holding together things, like these are things that it's really hard to talk about on a resume or CV, and people often don't get credit for those. And it's like, it's that unseen labor that kind of like ties communities together. And I see everyone here nodding because you are the people who do that. So like Mickey and Wendy and Lynn and Jane and Cliff and Daniel and Elizabeth and Marielle, and you guys all do that all the time. I see you constantly doing that like unseen labor of keeping the community going and giving of yourself when no one sees. And I think that's so incredibly important and does ultimately come back to you many times over as you proceed through your career.
It helps to pay it forward, as Angela said.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me that a number of things here, like one of them is that this idea of self-starting, this idea of a little bit of hustle, a little bit of finding out what you need to do and doing it, but also some degree of, if not self-promotion, promotion of your project, understanding what's important about it and being able to represent that. But also understanding what your own, I think Angela used the phrase marketable skills are that come into this. The idea that networking is part of that, but then also a kind of different way of thinking about this maybe than you experienced in your graduate programs. So I guess my next question would be something like, how much of a change does that kind of, I guess, mentality represent for you from what you did as a graduate student while you were earning your PhD to what you do now as a kind of manager director of this much larger initiative? And what are some of the skills that you brought into that that you cultivated during your PhD program? And what are some of the things that are totally new to you that you kind of had to learn on the fly? Learning on the job is another phrase that's coming up a few times.
I can start with that one.
Sure.
So for me, it doesn't. Like, I think for me, it was more that I came into Vanderbilt wanting to do this. And then I felt so discouraged as a grad student because everyone's like, no, you're going to be a Research 1 scholar at a tenure track university. And I was like, help, I don't want to. Like, I came from a museum background. I used to work in a museum and I wanted to have more of those curation skills. Like, I wanted to know more about how to make history important to people, because when it's not important, we see how that unfolds, right, in the world. And so I think for me, it wasn't so much like having to learn all these skills really fast. It was more like I used the PhD program to learn the really important nitty gritty, like detail oriented things that I would have missed if I hadn't done a PhD. So for me, the PhD was really important, not because it created a Research 1 scholar out of me who's going to work at a tenure track position somewhere, but because it taught me how to critically examine sources, how to show my work, how to publish articles in the top journals, so I can point to them and be like, my work is just as important as the stuff that you don't see in public history, right? Like, to be able to have that credential and be able to show that I'm very diligent, I'm very detail oriented, and I'm doing it right. So for me, like, that's kind of, it was more a reverse. So like when I finished, I was a little bit at odds because I was applying for academic jobs without really wanting them. And I interviewed several places where I could just feel, as I was talking, I could feel that there was like this filter between myself and the interviewers because I didn't want to be there. I didn't want that job. But then I felt guilty for not wanting that job because other people would kill to have that job. And so that was kind of like my interviewing experience. And then when I stayed here at Vanderbilt and was able to do postdocs and work with more public humanities type work, it was just so much better in every way. So I feel like being affiliated with the university, you get all those perks and all the best bits of being at a place like Vanderbilt that kind of has your back. But then also I'm able to be in the community and be valued for the skills that I brought here with me before I even came. And I love that part about it. So I think for me, it wasn't so much a mentality switch after the PhD. I had to switch my mentality when I came into the PhD.
So for me, since the projects that I've worked on are a little less explicitly public humanities than the projects that Angela and Mary Ellen have worked on, I actually want to emphasize something that Mary Ellen touched on a few minutes ago, which is acting as a translator between content experts and developers. That I think, so kind of what I'm thinking here is like, super mercenarily as somebody who's entering the job market, you have to think about what your value added is, what sets you apart from other folks who are going to be applying to the same positions that you're going to be applying for, right? And for me, something that I found, a way in which I found myself being useful in certain rooms is that when, software developers that have no knowledge of the content of a project start talking about, how they're going to build a database, how they're going to build a website or whatever, and they're talking in, jargony terms that are super intelligible to them, but not intelligible to the other half of the room that are content experts. And then the content experts have, very informed and deliberated and not unshakable, but fairly unshakable ideas about the content and the way that it should be portrayed in the digital context. And specifically the room I'm thinking of, Mary Ellen, actually was one in which Sharon Leon and I were kind of the two who lived a little bit in both worlds. But you need to have those people in the room because you need to be able to, because it's not even that, software developers and humanists want different things. They just can't communicate. They literally don't have a common language to articulate, how they want a project to be built, even if they have the exact same vision for the project. So there needs to be people in the room that speak both languages. And I think increasingly universities are recognizing that those people need to be there. And, again, places like Vanderbilt don't necessarily have a framework for those people to exist in yet. But I think increasingly as they see other universities finding places for those kinds of people, there's a recognition that those kind of people need to be around. And that's really good news for those of you who are entering the job market now, because you can be those people too. And that to me, so it's not for me either that, going through the PhD program changed or this pivot changed anything in the way I approached it, but rather that it's the two kind of skill sets complement each other, and they complement each other in a really specific way that I think is, not only it's obviously kind of objectively valuable, but I think it's also legitimately valuable on the job market.
Yeah, just add something to that because you're 1000% right. But something I have found is that when you are that middle person, you don't have a firm footing in either world necessarily, which means that you don't have the full protection of either world either. And so often people don't understand your value because they just see you as you're just the middle person, which is like, no, I'm the person who makes the conversation happen. But trying to find the words to be able to explain that value to someone who is looking to pay you, or to write that down on a grant application and show that you are really the right person for that. I think that takes a lot more work than someone who's firmly in either world.
Well, and I'll add to that by saying also that ultimately part of this is saying I live in one of those two worlds. That may be wrong, but I think you have to skew one way or the other so that you're not that firmly in the middle person. But you can still be the person who's as closer to the middle than anybody else on your side of the world, right? And that's kind of how that works, at least for me.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things because I do think I have one thing that's slightly different from Angela and Daniel. But I was going to say also as that middle person, quite often the developers don't understand the nuances and importance of content. And then those who are writing the content don't understand the scope and lift of work for the web developers. And so even just understanding the scale of things is quite often I use so many analogies about houses when I'm trying to explain things. They're like, okay, so the website is like we've taken it down to the studs, but or we just need to change out the faucet. So I'm always trying to use analogies to help each world talk to the other. But I'll say that the thing that's slightly different for me is that I actually have zero interest in being in a tenure track job, except for the fact that that's the way the system's built. And that's really the key for me, is that I love teaching. And so for me to be in higher education and to teach, I've got to find a tenure track job or I just bounce around. And so that's why, I love the digital projects. I still love traditional scholarship and research and writing, but I love teaching. Like I taught a class in the fall called The Good Life that was interdisciplinary honors course, another one called Democracy, Media, and the Public Sphere. Like I am intellectually curious all the time. And so I like to be in the classroom. I like to develop new classes and coursework and pedagogy. And then I can pull in these projects. Like I've taught a class on digital humanities and national sites, so that they can also work on some of these projects. So I do think for me, like that's part of the reason that I at least played the long game, I guess. Angel's exactly right. You have to be both flexible, but you have to sort of have these different, you know what you think is you want behind door number 1 or door number 2 or door number 3. You don't know which one you're going to be able to go through, but you at least need to kind of have these tracks of options that you're willing, that you're able to switch or maybe prioritize what you're working on based on which opportunities present themselves. So, if Belmont hadn't come through with a teaching job, then I would have, and I don't, Harvard Hall is amazing and I love it, but, it was just survey courses and to be able to spread my wings in a different way was really what I was looking for my next opportunity. But I'll close by saying that my associate provost called me, and I think I like this term. She called me an academic entrepreneur. And so I think that might in some ways describe like best what I'm trying to do, is that in some ways, even these are nonprofit, these are educational tools that we're building, but in order for the project to happen, you have to have this entrepreneurial mindset to be able to get it done. I mean, it really is like all 3 of our projects, they're like their own little small businesses. So I think that's yet another layer of that to consider when thinking about, what kinds of projects you might want to undertake.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. Like the entrepreneurial focus or energy, the idea of marketing yourself, the idea of networking in all these kinds of ways. Project management is another sort of big conceptual framework or set of ideas that we don't talk a lot about in academia, in humanities particularly. It's like those terms and concepts are off the disciplinary table in a way, but so helpful for describing what it is that we do in this world. I'm going to just ask if anybody has questions. We should save some time for that here at the end. Hey, Lynn.
I do. But you can cut this out of the recording if you'd like, which we'll talk about that later. But I'm okay. So to me, this seems like a really appropriate and timely panel that a ton of graduate students would be interested in, and yet they're not here. And each one of you on the panel kind of, you've made that transition, or in the case of Angela, you started out that way, but whatever. What do you think is going through, not Wendy because she's here, but like what is going through the minds of graduate students that we know are interested in digital work, we know are interested in public facing work, but I'm suspecting that they don't feel like they're qualified to move in that direction. That's all I can imagine, is that they, and because each one of you mentioned, like, you've all done amazing things, and yet each one of you qualified them in some way or another by saying, oh, I'm just, I just go between, or I had no idea I was going to do this. I didn't think I could do this. And, this kind of thing, but you've made that transition and now, you can. So what are your thoughts about what graduate students might be thinking and how to help address this? Or is this just something you have to live through?
Can I interject also, like, that great question, and is lack of support or lack of understanding from the academic side of your world when you're a graduate student also a part of that?
Yeah, I think that there's two sides to this. One of them is absolutely what Lynn said, which is people just think they can't do it. And I think the only way to get over that is to show them that they can. But you still have to get them in the door to do that. So that's kind of a tricky part. The second thing, and this again is not necessarily a fully tractable problem, is the feeling that the effort required to get a toehold is not worth the payoff, which I think is wrong. I mean, just wrong, right? I think certainly the path that the three of us have taken is emblematic of the fact that it is worthwhile, and I think it's only going to become increasingly more worthwhile in a post-pandemic world. But that may just take time for that mindset to shift. To me, the best thing I can think of to do is to continue to show to ourselves and body examples of why you can do it and it is worthwhile. Because there's no way to force people to do any of this. I was even talking to Mickey about this yesterday in terms of faculty DH work. There's no way to force anybody to kind of invest in this world. But I think the best possible way to encourage that is to do good work and to show that the good work has value, whether it's getting grants or getting jobs or getting some form of recognition. There's probably cleverer ways to do it than that, but that's my thought.
Yeah, I think another big part of it is like just the lack of clear mentorship. Because I think when you're a grad student, you're assigned an advisor, and most of the time, your advisor is that person who's telling you to do things the way that they did it when they when they were in grad school in the 1970s, and that just isn't a way that you can live in the world right now. And I think there's I don't want to get into Jungian craziness, but there's the Seneca and the Poi, which is the person who has this long-term institutional knowledge of the field, and they're incredibly important. But then this younger person who's just coming in is equally as important because they're bringing this perspective to where the field will eventually go. And I think the two need to have this mutual respect and understanding that my world will never be your world and your world can never be my world. But both of us have really important things that we can bring to the world. And I think in grad school, there's so much emphasis culturally sometimes on being that obedient apprentice in this one track, and it's almost like there's a betrayal if you are leaving and looking elsewhere, having multiple mentors, when really we need to be encouraging that. It's really important that you value the work of people far and wide, and that you really go where you're interested and not shamed for having interests that go outside of that traditional track. And I mean, academia, with the way it is imploding now, there's no way to know what it's going to look like in 10 years and 20 years. But we do know that something is going to be here. There will always be people who want to learn, and there will always be people who want to research and create projects from their research. And so really it's in our best interest to allow our grad students to go wide and broad and to encourage them to seek out mentors in other places and to have those formalized partnerships available. So I think kind of helping people to normalize that culture is going to do a long way towards both helping academia's culture later when it starts to really fall apart, and also helping to normalize scholarship in the real world, right? Both of those things are equally important. You need both of those things to be strong for a healthy society.
I'll just answer very quickly. I think that right now the job market doesn't really have titles that represent what any of us do. So as Angela and Daniel both mentioned, academia hasn't quite caught up. Honestly, a lot of nonprofits haven't caught up. So people need to sort of get outside their disciplinary bubble and look for things where the job title might not match what the job actually is or what you could make it. And so you got to be really open-minded, go out, do those internships, connect with people that way. Job title might not sound like what you think it is, or a postdoc or an internship or whatever, but oftentimes you can mold it and shape it as you're in the actual job. And so I would just say don't be limited by terminology, because it's also fluid.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. We are technically out of time, but if anybody wants to linger and converse further, that is absolutely encouraged. And let's just say right now, thank you to all of our panelists. This was really an excellent conversation. Thanks so much. Anyone else burning with questions for our panelists that they want to ask before we all sign off?
I guess I maybe kind of want to chime in to that last question, that last discussion, as the grad student in the room. And part of the reason why I'm here today is not because I'm immediately entering the job market. I'm in my third year of my PhD. I'm not ABD yet. Hopefully soon, and very much looking forward to that day. But, I am sort of keeping an eye on everything that's been going on, and I have been since I started my master's in 2016. I'm wanting to sort of keep my ear to the ground in terms of like what is happening with the university, what has the university's history been, and as a German studies scholar, I am also keeping an eye on that, because historically German studies has these like waves at the university, especially in American universities, where sometimes enrollment is way up, and other times there's nothing is happening in German studies, and so especially with this pandemic, I am growing more and more concerned about the future of the university. Excuse my cat, she's about to start yelling at me. I'm concerned about the future of German studies at the university. I'm concerned about the future of tenure track positions at the university. And as a very recent example, there's a job postings wiki page for multiple disciplines, but also for German studies. And at the beginning of the most recent job season, I guess we can call it, at the beginning of it, there was one position available, and it wasn't even tenure track. And so imagine you have all these grad students who are training and trying to become professional Germanists in this way with their brand new PhDs. And that's not a guarantee. And maybe it never was a guarantee, but that's sort of besides the point. The fact is that like some of these things we've always taken for granted are no longer there. They're no longer available. And so I recognize that already, even long before the pandemic, people have been doing things like digital humanities as a way to sort of hedge their bets, to sort of add a little something extra onto the CV, perhaps, in order to secure some sort of job, if not in a language study, then maybe in something else, or to sort of be, in two departments at one time or something like that. And I can't help but wonder, almost like what now, and like hearing what the three of you have done is super exciting, because it does show that there is some promise and there are ways to find your niche at an institution and to secure yourself a job and to get that job security. That's so cool. That's great. Like, it's really motivating to know that exists somewhere. I wonder, though, with the expectations that are already put on graduate students and with the resources available to graduate students, being at Vanderbilt, I've recognized that I'm very privileged to be here and that I have so much at my fingertips. So I'm stoked about that. Not every graduate student has that, though. And, with all of these expectations and lack of resources, I wonder, like, how possible are these sorts of things for every single grad student who happens to be interested in not only digital humanities, but also something else. Oh gosh, there was one more thought I had with that. And definitely like the mentorship and the networking thing I think is so important. But there are some power structures that maybe need to be reworked. If you have an advisor that's telling you that publishing articles is the way to go, and then they're not open to digital humanities projects as a meaningful way of doing research and making your research public, where do you go from there? And like, how do you convince them that, no, really, when you write my recommendation letter, you should put that in there. You should include this extra work that I do. I don't know that I necessarily have a question, but I did just want to maybe follow up with a grad student perspective, because I am still in the middle of it.
Yeah,
You know, you can always write the Germantown walking tour for Nashville Sites.
I mean, I could look into it possibly, but I mean, I'm teaching a course, I'm still taking courses, I'm writing an exam. I'm supposed to be doing research in Germany next year. Like, I'm wondering, like, how do I, when I do hit the job market, when I am putting myself out there, how do I find the time to do all of these things all at once? Like, I know a lot of it is time management, right? But if I am constantly being pulled in multiple directions and not given the time to focus on a single project.
I think I'll just, because I know Angel's about to jump in, but I'll just say, like, in all seriousness, plugging into projects where you can add something, and whether or not your advisor thinks it or not, you're published. Like, you are the curator of that tour, and in my particular case. And so I think plugging into projects, making these small strides, that things not only that you can list on your CV, but things that you can talk about that involve primary research, secondary research, public history, curating a tour, that kind of thing. Again, it's specific to my project, but I would give that same advice. Like, find other projects where you can plug in, 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours over, 6 months, that can start to give you additional experience that's going to broaden your toolkit.
Yeah, and I have published in academic journals that have been vetted by other scholars in the field about my digital humanities work. Actually, most of my article publications are about DH in some way, or something that I've done through DH. And so, like, there are still ways to show it's like, hey, I'm rigorous. Like, I've been peer reviewed multiple times. Like, what I'm doing is legit. Not that I should have to, but I always feel the need to as well. I do feel like people are constantly asking me to justify my existence, which is just a byproduct of being one of the, not the first, but in that first wave, I think. Something that I wanted to clear up, like, I don't have answers because, yeah, grad students do have way too much to do. It's true. But I don't have job security. I just wanted to make that very clear. Like, I do not have job security. I've never had job security. I have had 6 two-year positions in a row where I have worked in different ways, in different capacities, for different places at Vanderbilt, and some places not at Vanderbilt. I've done all kinds of really weird jobs to pay bills, and this project is something that I squeeze in where I can. And it's only more recently that people have recognized that this work is valuable and have made it part of my job. So, like, and that's just, like, fortunately having people in positions where they can see that and advocate for me, right? Like, Dean Dow saw that this project has worth to the university once people started writing about it in newspapers, and that's when they made it part of my job to be allowed to do that. But, like, for the first few years, I was just squeezing it in where I could. Like, I was doing online tutoring. I was doing translation from German into English. I was doing teaching, adjuncting at several places. Like, I've done all kinds of weird jobs. And I think, like, I don't expect to ever have job security doing this. It may one day come because of what I do, but it's totally possible I never will. And that is something that I've just accepted as a millennial, because so many of my friends who are not in academia also face job insecurity. And so I feel like I'd rather be insecure in a job that I love than secure in a job I don't.
So I think, like, maybe the biggest common thread between the path the three of us have taken is that we kind of had a plan, had a vision for something, and just kind of did it. And I mean, not that there was an expectation that things wouldn't work out, but there was no guarantee that things would work out. But again, for all three of us, things have worked out so far. I don't think that's entirely coincidental. I do think this is still a world that, despite the constraints on resources and positions and time, good work and dedication is rewarded. It's not a guarantee. There's no guarantee, but I think the absolute best thing that you can do, if this is something you're interested in doing, is find something that you want to build and, start taking concrete steps towards building it, or find another project that already exists that you believe in and start making concrete contributions to it. And again, it's not a guarantee. It's never a guarantee. I also have never had pure job security. I mean, now staring down, 3 years of job security is kind of a new experience for me. I don't even know what that feels like. But I think it's not a coincidence that, to this point, all three of us have, every time it looked like things were going to fall apart, the next thing came into place. And I think that is indicative of the fact that there are opportunities for people who are willing to put in the work and have these hybrid skill sets. And I think very specifically, just in terms of thinking how to allocate resources as time, energy as a grad student, the investment required to open up those additional opportunities is absolutely worthwhile in terms of maximizing your probability of ending up in a job that you're happy with down the road. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. You know, my final year of grad school, I spent the first, half of the year getting SSDA up and running, and the second half of the year literally writing my whole dissertation. And that was a busy year, but we did it. And at the end of that, that was what put me on the path to, the path that I'm still going down. And that's just kind of, I think, how it shakes out.
Let me add quickly, Mickey, I know we need to go, but I was just going to add one other common thread that we haven't said out loud. And that is, you talked about the work ethic, but it's just like time commitments. I bet the three of us managing multiple projects, I technically had 3 jobs for 4 years. The number of weeks that we worked between those 3 jobs, over 80 hours a week. So that's part of it too, is like you put in this huge amount of time, not knowing what it's going to yield, but trusting that it will yield something. And so that's the other piece. And I think that's just sort of an add-on to what Daniel was talking about with the hard work, but with that comes a lot of time.
So it has to be something that you're drawn to anyway, not a checklist of skills that you need to learn necessarily, but something that's worth it to you for your own reasons.
Or at least some of it has to be, not, like some of the 80 hours I was adjuncting at Belmont and teaching an early modern European class. That doesn't, that's not a big thrill for me. So it's like I'd go in, I'd turn it on, I'd deliver, I'd leave. I wasn't thinking about early modern European history after that, but I did that because that was part of a stepping stone that was getting me to another place, and also, keeping me plugged into the university. So it's not all your time is you're passionate about that thing, but that when you put it all together, like there's going to be some things that you don't want to spend time on, but you need to pay the bills. While you're still, as Angela said, like finding ways to weave in when to work on the project you're really passionate about, that you hope does pay off with some kind of being a part of your actual job description.
Did anybody want to follow up with final thoughts or questions before we part? I think it's an ongoing struggle, really. The changing nature of academia right now, and the fact that there is a lot that's just ossified about it. A lot of those power structures that we've mentioned are really kind of rigidly ingrained. And I think one of the reasons why we're talking about digital humanities here and now is because that's one of the areas that is actually open to change and where changes are happening really quickly. But we'll see what this all looks like in 10 years. We can come back and talk to each other again and find out where everyone's paths have taken them in the meantime. But for right now, I'll say thank you again to our panelists. This was great. I know you all from so many different contexts, but I don't think we've ever had a really focused conversation about this specifically before, and it's been fascinating. So thank you. Thank you again for being here.
Nikki, next time have this at 5 o'clock so we can all have a glass of wine.
Ideally, let's have this at 5 o'clock and in person so we can all have a glass of wine and then dinner afterwards or something, at least see each other face to face. But thank you for being here this time.
Thank you, Mickey. Thank you,
Bye, guys.